When I was a kid, I used to dream of changing the world. Once I became a millionaire. I looked at people like Oprah and Bill Gates, and I saw how they had used the wealth that they acquired to make the world a better place, and I wanted to do the same thing. I thought about how many homeless shelters I would build, how much food I would buy to fill people's stomachs, and imagined myself handing out large sums of money to people on the streets just to make them smile. I thought that the world's problems were ones that could only be solved by people who had a lot of money, and I too wanted to make a change. Well, my idea of service evolved, and it evolved the more that I watched my mother. My mother was the homeless education supervisor for my hometown in Prince George's County, Maryland. Now, Prince George's County is a place of paradoxes. It is nationally considered one of the most affluent areas for African Americans, yet my mom had over 2,000 kids registered as homeless and needy, and probably even more that were unaccounted for. But I watched as she made sure every last one of them had uniforms, clothes for the weekend, school supplies, a backpack, a coat for the winter, free breakfast and lunch at school, and tutoring to make sure that they succeeded. Now, my mom would rarely pull money out of her own pocket. She would if it meant going the extra mile for a kid, but the vast majority of the time, she didn't use any of her own money at all. And if you ask people in the school system, they would tell you my mom was one of the best to ever do this job. And it was because she used her gift of advocacy, her love for children, and her ability to relate to what it was like growing up and struggling financially to help people overcoming the same things. She was not a millionaire by any stretch of the imagination, but she was a hero to a lot of people. I started to realize service wasn't all about money at all. It was about time, it was about contact, and it was about thoughtfulness. And my mom was using all of these things, plus her own gifts and talents, to make an impact that money can't buy. I started to think about ways that I too could use my own gifts and talents to make an impact. Throughout high school, I volunteered at Shepherd's Cove Homeless Shelter and Campfire USA. Campfire USA was a camp that catered to mostly homeless and needy kids in the Prince George's County area. And one summer, when I was the camp counselor at Campfire, I realized a lot of the kids I was working with had pent-up anger and aggression and emotions that they didn't know how to express in a healthy way. And so oftentimes this channeled itself into disciplinary issues just because they didn't know how to express what they were feeling. Meanwhile, I loved to write poetry, and I had always used it as a form of therapy for myself. And in 10th grade, in my English class, we were assigned a project called Written in My Soul, where we were assigned to bring in a poem or write a poem that expressed what was written in our soul. So there it was. That's where the idea came from, Written in My Soul. Written in My Soul is a program I founded here at the University of Miami about 3 years ago. Its mission is to teach youth how to use poetry as a healthy form of self-expression. And we do this through writing workshops where we teach everything from similes to metaphors to personification and all types of writing techniques that they can use in their poems, as well as performance skills so that they're confident performing their poem. And then at the end of the program, we bring them here to the University of Miami campus where they can perform their poetry at a poetry slam in front of the UM community. Now, Written in My Soul is made possible by the Social Innovation Grant from the Butler Center, as well as some financial backing from the school, but the reality is, Written in My Soul could be done with virtually no money at all. All we need is paper, pens, and our own presence to make a difference, as we use our gifts of storytelling, of writing, and of poetry to make an impact that money can't buy. Now, I would be lying to you if I said anything about Written in My Soul was easy. It is not. It is incredibly challenging, it can be hard to plan, and it is such a niche program that it doesn't relate to every kid that we present it to. But it is what Drew Dudley calls lollipop moments in his own TED Talk, Leading with Lollipops, that makes it all worth it. As Dudley describes, lollipop moments are things that people say or do that fundamentally make our lives better, whether they know it or not. For me, my lollipop moment with Written in My Soul came last semester during our last session with the Overtown Youth Center. It was a terrible day, honestly. The kids were not listening at all, and I actually wound up stopping the program we had planned. And I said, okay, whoever wants to play, you can go over here, but if you want to write, you can come over here with me and write. And so one little girl that chose to write, she finished and she handed me her journal, and I opened it to find a poem that absolutely broke my heart. She wrote about how she was bullied, how people called her fat and ugly and said she smelled bad. And I went up to her and I said, "You don't believe these things, do you?" And she nodded her head yes. And I sat next to her and I told her about how I too struggled with self-love, with self-esteem because of things people said about me. But every day I would look at myself in the mirror and remind myself that I was beautiful and that I was amazing until eventually I started to believe it. And I asked her to promise me that she would do the same thing. And so she nodded, and I left her alone because I figured she didn't want to talk to me about this anymore. But I didn't know if she truly heard me. Until about 20 minutes later, my volunteers and I were walking out of the facility, and I hear a little voice yell, "I promise," and I look up to see the little girl waving back at me. Now, I believe that that was a lollipop moment for both of us. For her, I think that I put her on the path towards better self-esteem and towards loving herself more. And for me, she let me know that I was doing something right with written in my soul and that it was impacting somebody. And that was an impact that money can't buy. I started to see this idea of using your own gifts and talents come alive during my study abroad experience in South Africa. So I chose to do the Cape Town program because it was one of the few programs UM offered where you could do service learning for credit. And I watched as people from University of Miami that I went to use their own gifts and talents and the things that they loved to make an impact on the community. Bella loved riding horses, so she worked with an organization in Cape Town on teaching kids with disabilities how to ride horses. Jaden loved the outdoors and hiking, so she worked with Table Mountain National Park on finding ways to make the hiking trails safer for hikers. And Perry loved coding, so she took a group of kids from her after-school program and helped them build a website where they could sell their very own fashion designs. And I used my love for teaching and education and the youth to work with an organization called Shako. Now, Shako was a student-run organization through the University of Cape Town. And through Shako, I was able to teach reading and math to second and third graders in Nyanga and Manenberg, which are two different townships. Nyanga is a black township, and Manenberg is a colored township. And just to parenthetically pause, colored in the South African context refers to people of mixed ancestry. So they can be of African ancestry, European, or Southeast Asian ancestry. And through working in Manenberg and Nyanga, I learned more about what service was, but even more than that, I learned about what service was not. In high school, I had had conversations about service as a mutual exchange, but I think before coming to South Africa, I was still guilty of thinking of service as a mostly unilateral experience, and possibly having a bit of a savior complex. But while in South Africa, it became less about what I could give to the community, and more about what I could also absorb and learn from those I was serving. Now, though English was one of 11 official languages in South Africa, most of my kids did not speak English. In Nyanga, they spoke Xhosa, and in Manenberg, they spoke a little bit more English, but Afrikaans as well. And in Nyanga especially, the language barrier was challenging at times, but it provided this bridge between my culture and theirs. One of my favorite things to do when my kids became rowdy and didn't feel like listening or doing their work anymore was to point to items around the classroom or items of clothing that I was wearing and ask them to teach me the word in their language. And they would laugh at my mispronunciations, which happened often because Xhosa did not come naturally to me, and they would nod proudly when I finally mastered a word. And what I realized was that the more open I became to learning about their culture and their language, the more open they became to me and learning about me and what I was teaching them. I expanded their world, and they expanded mine, and this mutually beneficial relationship ensued. But not only did they teach me about their language and their culture, they completely changed my life perspective. The kids I worked with, especially in Nyanga, were some of the happiest kids I've ever seen, but they were also some of the poorest. Many of them did not have adequate food or water or shelter, and we would go through the townships every day to get to the school, and we would pass these dilapidated shacks that were being held by these aluminum panels that probably had hundreds and thousands of health code violations, and I would have the same realization over and over and over again that those are my kids' homes. But their attitude did not reflect that. They were so focused on the present moment and on being joyful and zealous with what they had, they were not even focused on what they didn't have. They undoubtedly changed my life perspective, and they didn't even know it. So I would like to leave you with this. You do not have to wait until you're the next millionaire or billionaire or Oprah or Bill Gates to make a difference. You can do it right now. In fact, you should do it right now, because not enough people are doing what they can to make the world a better place. So here's a toolbox to show you how you can. The first thing you need is a moment. You need a moment of observation where you observe an issue that you were passionate about addressing. So for me, it was the moment at campfire where I said, hey, my kids are really angry and they have a lot of emotions that they don't know how to express. I want to fix that. The second thing you need is a method. The method is your how. How are you going to address that issue that you observed? So for me, it was poetry. I used poetry to teach my kids how to express themselves in a healthy way. And the third thing you need is a mindset. You need a mindset of a true servant leader and not a savior complex. You are not better than anyone, and you are not solving all of anyone's problems. You are using your own gifts and talents to do what you can to address a larger issue. And in doing such, you're open to absorbing and learning what you can from those you are serving. That is a mindset of a true servant leader. So once you have your moment, your method, and a mindset of a true servant leader, you will be on your way to making an impact that money can't buy. Thank you.